Karma is so sweet, and it is so much sweeter when Donald Trump is the one experiencing it. And that is exactly what we saw today after some unfortunate wins for Donald Trump in the Supreme Court were followed up with one of the most brutal losses that he has seen throughout his entire presidency. After posting an insane message on Truth Social, he was instantly hit, served himself by a lawsuit that is blowing up one of his biggest plans. And I got to break it down with Congressman Jamie Raskin in an exclusive interview in which he shared some of the most disastrous news Donald Trump has heard yet. We're going to get into it all, but before we do, of course, we need to start with the bragging we saw from Donald Trump that eventually led to his downfall.
Thanks for this decision, and thanks to this decision, we can now promptly file to proceed with numerous policies that have been wrongly enjoined on a nationwide basis. And some of the cases we're talking about would be ending birthright citizenship, which now comes to the fore. That was meant for the babies of slaves. It wasn't meant for people trying to scam the system and come into the country.
So after the Supreme Court decisions today, Donald Trump was bragging about how he was planning on undermining one of the most fundamental aspects of the American experiment, birthright citizenship. That is what Donald Trump plans to go after. And of course, Donald Trump couldn't stop at just bragging at a press conference. He took to Truth Social, and it was quickly after these posts that we are going to check out that he got hit with a brutal lawsuit. First, Trump wrote, "This is such a big day, a very monumental decision," as he shared a clip of him bragging about his Supreme Court victories. Then Trump wrote, "Giant win in the United States Supreme Court. Even the birthright citizenship hoax has been indirectly hit hard. It had something to do with babies of slaves same year, not the scamming of our immigration process. Congratulations to Attorney General Pam Bondi and the entire DOJ news conference at the White House." So Donald Trump was riding high and feeling good that him and his stooges on the Supreme Court were working to undermine one of the most core tenets to our nation in birthright citizenship, something enshrined in our Constitution. But the high for Donald Trump didn't last too long because he was immediately hit with a lawsuit which will block his attack on birthright citizenship. I want to check it all out. And then we broke it down in an interview you are going to want to watch all of with Jamie Raskin. But first, let's get the look. Groups filed nationwide class action lawsuit over Trump birthright citizenship order. Immigrants' rights advocates today filed a new nationwide class action lawsuit challenging the Trump administration's executive order restricting birthright citizenship. The lawsuit is in response to today's Supreme Court ruling that potentially opens the door for partial enforcement of the executive order.
Congressman, we obviously saw some very unsettling and disastrous and dangerous decisions handed down from the Supreme Court today, but I wanted to start with some of the positive legal news that we can get into. We saw some wins this week. Of course, we saw the release of Mahmoud Khalil. But can you talk more about, before we get into the unfortunate, some of the exciting legal wins that we saw against this administration?
Well, first of all, we've hit the number of 199 federal court injunctions or temporary restraining orders issued against this reign of lawlessness at the district court level. And it's the vigor and the focus of the district courts that is leading the Supreme Court to try to clip their wings in different ways. We just saw a marvelous decision out of Boston from a federal district judge who struck down all of these attacks on NIH program grants to scientific establishments around the country. Basically, if they mention the words DEI or diversity in them, it could be on anything. It could be on cancer, cystic fibrosis.
It's a lot of Control F policing. Yeah. It's very strange.
And this district judge said this is just outrageous viewpoint discrimination under the First Amendment, dismantling grants that have already been paid for by federal appropriations, allotted by the agency, promised to the people, all because somebody punches the word diversity or woman into the computer. And you know that
these are very scary words, diversity and woman, for the Trump administration.
They got rid of the Enola Gay exhibit, which is the exhibit on the airplane that was used to drop the bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the Smithsonian, because somebody typed in the word gay and Enola Gay came out. That was the name of the wife of the pilot. They named the airplane after her. So, I mean,
not a lot of competency happening here, is there?
This is like Malice in Blunderland. You know, it's just, we just lurch from error to error. It is a reign of error we're in. So, but the district court judges are just hanging tough overwhelmingly. It's really impressive. They are earning their salaries and doing their jobs, which is why Trump is talking about impeaching these radical left rogue judges, including Judge Boasberg, who said turn the airplanes around, who was a George W. Bush appointee to the court and was Justice Kavanaugh's roommate at Yale Law School and a pillar of the conservative establishment. But some of these people are sticklers for the rule of law, and they don't like the idea that Donald Trump and his henchmen think you can just trample the due process rights of the people and trash the Constitution. So yeah, we've won some good ones. There was another one where Trump was saying we're not going to give transportation grants to all these Democratic jurisdictions. Basically, we'll give transportation grants to Republican states, but not Democratic states, because these are the ones that are engaged in sanctuary cities or allowing sanctuary cities. And the court just said the two things have nothing to do with each other. If you think there's something unlawful about sanctuary cities, bring a case against them, but you don't cut off access to highway funds or, mass transportation funding, subway funding, bus funding, because you don't like what you think somebody's doing about immigration.
And it's interesting, I don't want to call it funny, it's scary that Trump, it feels like he ran exclusively, because it's such a petty politics of grievance with Republicans, especially Trump, they've learned it from him, but exclusively on the weaponization of government, the lie he was telling about the weaponization of government against him, against Republicans, against the forgotten man that Trump claims to represent. It's now what he's carrying out, of course, in his administration, and now talking about how all the judges are against him except for the Supreme Court ruling favorably for him today. I could ask you a million questions about some of these rulings that were passed down, but I kind of just want to let you cook and just let you go and put a quarter in the machine here.
I mean, I think your point is well taken, but before you get to the weaponization of government, you got to look at what's really going on, which is he views the federal government and all government as a money-making opportunity and arena for him and his family and his corporations. And he can't say that because how many people is that going to appeal to? So instead, he says, well, we're going to weaponize the government against this enemy and that enemy. And there's a certain kind of cinematic thrill and excitement in that for the MAGA crowd. Still, I think the vast majority of the American people reject that as the purpose for government, either to be looting the government for your corporations and turning yourself into a multi-billionaire, or using the government to go after, you name it, immigrants, gay people, his political enemies, members of Congress. One of my colleagues, LaMonica MacGyver, is facing 17 years in prison for going to a scheduled appointment to tour an ICE facility, and then the ICE people staged this whole scrum with the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, and now they want to send her to jail for 17 years, federalizing the National Guard.
The job to do the oversight being carried out at that facility.
She's engaged in her speech and debate clause duties to conduct oversight. But look, I know everybody's bummed out about the Supreme Court decision on birthright citizenship. The first thing people have to understand about that is that 4 district courts struck down Trump's attempt to nullify birthright citizenship for millions of people. They struck it down. 2 Democratic judges, a Biden and Obama judge, 2 Republican judges, a Bush judge, a Reagan judge. The Reagan judge said this was the easiest case he had decided in more than 4 decades on the bench, the most blatantly unconstitutional executive order he'd ever seen, directly colliding with the first sentence of the 14th Amendment, which says no person, or rather, all persons born and naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. It's just perfectly clear. You don't have to be a lawyer, you just have to know how to read to get that. If you're a strict textualist and an originalist, certainly you should be able to understand that. Well, so Trump has lost in 100% of the cases that have looked at it, but the Supreme Court, in a desperate attempt to appease him always and soothe his wounded ego, said, all right, well, we're not going to look at the substance of that decision. We're just going to say that the courts that issued a nationwide injunction went too far. They can only have that ruling in their own district. So now the Supreme Court has basically shrunken it down to those 4 districts, meaning that everybody else in America now either has to go out and bring their own case in their own federal district court or a nationwide class action, which is a ridiculous way to run a legal system, but they're always looking for a way to soothe his wounded feelings and ego. So we're going to do it. that actually hurts Donald Trump politically. It helps us immensely because it's a terribly unpopular thing as well as a completely unconstitutional thing to do. So now we're going to be having cases all over America, taking him to task for trashing our Constitution. We're going to win all over America.
So we have something to look forward to.
I think so. Now, God only knows what happens when it gets up to the Supreme Court, but I think one reason that Amy Coney Barrett wrote that decision was so she could say, well, at least on the procedure of it, on the equitable jurisdiction of the federal courts. I was with the MEGA on that, but no, I can't go so far as to say Donald Trump can directly violate the Constitution of the United States. And I hope that Chief Justice Roberts would do the right thing there too. They've both been doing very well on the whole due process thing. It's just unfortunate that we have a federal judiciary that's operating like real courts all over the land, like real judges, and then you get to the Supreme Court and it's all this political games playing. But we're going to have to do it. In the meantime, it's going to help us because everybody hates that idea that you could have millions of people born in America from here on in who are not citizens of the country. It's just an appalling assault on our own history. I mean, the reason that sentence is in the 14th Amendment is because of the Dred Scott decision. It reversed the Dred Scott decision, which said that the African-American descendants of enslaved people could never be citizens themselves. And after the Civil War, the radical Republicans said, no way, that doesn't make any sense. Everybody who's born in America is a citizen here.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you're speaking to the kind of campaign that we'll have to launch in our communication against this. Your colleague, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, always says that, Donald Trump's immigration policies, and, at the beginning of his administration, there was some level of broader popularity. I think it was through a misunderstanding of what they would be, but that they're not popular. We just don't work hard enough to make them unpopular. We see now at this point, they're underwater as people see these mass ICE raids, these thugs inflicting violence on people, simply trying to do their jobs and be in their communities. But we'll have to carry out this messaging campaign across the country. We'll be battling back, but at the same time, it feels like so often, and understandably so, we're only working in opposition. Yeah. What do you think our aspirational view is right now? Saying, this is what we have to, this is the Band-Aid, right now this is the tough work.
Yes.
But afterwards, what does the process look like when we can build something better?
So 2 points on that. One is, you're absolutely right. We're going to have to take this battle around birthright citizenship out to the country. And for me, I love it. I'm going to be able to do education about the 14th Amendment and what it means and what the Civil War and Reconstruction were all about and how this was a direct overruling of the Dred Scott decision, which Donald Trump and his team want to resurrect. So it's not going to, Trump won't be content just to have 4 district courts, 2 Republican, 2 Democrat, strike him down. He's going to want 75 or 80 federal courts strike him down. Great, the more the merrier, or do it with a nationwide class action. Put 800,000 people on it, whatever the case will be. We're going to beat him every single time to the extent that we have real judges as opposed to judges who just act like MAGA sycophants like Alito and Thomas do. But your point is right that, look, politics is like football or chess in that sense that you've got to be playing defense and offense at the same time. Yeah. And certain plays are going to be on defense, and then you get the ball, you turn it around, and you march down the field. And in chess, the best defensive moves are offensive moves at the same time, right? And so we've got to keep that mentality going. I mean, when I go around the country, a lot of people are saying we've got to defend democracy, and this I agree with, and this is the work I'm engaged in. But democracy is never just a static collection of rules and practices. Democracy is always an unfinished project. It's a process in motion. It's always a rough draft. So when we say we're defending democracy, yeah, we got to defend the right to vote where it exists, where it's safe, but we've got to be expanding the right to vote. We got to get back on the growth path in terms of statehood, for example. And I'm not talking about Greenland, and I'm not talking about Canada, I'm not talking about Panama, I'm talking about Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico, people who want statehood, people who are fighting for statehood. We got millions of disenfranchised Americans. We need a constitutional amendment guaranteeing the right to vote, what we didn't start off with when the country was born. It's not in the original Constitution. There was no constitutional right to vote. Most people couldn't vote. Women couldn't vote. The enslaved people couldn't vote. People without property couldn't vote. And that's why we have this kind of ragtag sequence of anti-discrimination amendments, like you can't discriminate based on race in voting. the 15th Amendment. You can't discriminate based on sex in voting, the 19th Amendment, and so on. But nowhere do you get a universal affirmative grant of everybody's right to vote, which is why the right to vote is always in danger with their voter suppression and disenfranchisement schemes. You know, as down in Texas, it's unbelievable the stuff the Republicans in Texas have come up with. Yeah, you can register to vote, but it's just every other Thursday between 4 and 4:15 at a library 45 miles away from you.
So many examples of that when, it's like with Doge and Elon when it was, touting all his accomplishments on Twitter but would never come and speak to the Congress. There's so many examples of Republicans who claim that they want people to engage, but it's not really true. You brought up kind of disenfranchised voters. I guess now I'm technically one of those as a DC resident now myself. You were saying right before we started shooting, why not come to Maryland as we seek to kind of Trump-proof this city as he tries to take his authoritarian regime, the federal government, make it on DC as well. Someone who has talked extensively about Trump-proofing a city is someone who might be the mayor of there soon, Zohran Mamdani, who just won the Democratic primary, of course, in New York, and we've been talking a lot about his vision on the show, and also what are the takeaways of his campaign? I think you speak about democracy in a similar way that he talks about building city government. And again, I always reference that word, the aspirational view. What did maybe you take away from his campaign that maybe Democrats should be implementing at a national level?
Well, look, generational politics has always been a motor force in American history. There's a constant infusion of new generations with new perspectives and new ideas and new approaches to things. That to me is thrilling. That's what democracy is all about. And the young people today have had a very different experience growing up than I had growing up. I didn't have to deal with COVID-19. I didn't have to deal with climate change overhanging everything, informing people's decision about whether or not to get married and have kids.
Matcha wasn't $10.
That's right. The cost of housing was very different. So, people need to listen to new generation and not try to extinguish new generations of leaders. I find that a very exciting and thrilling process. We don't have to be stuck in the same mindset forever. And so, come senators and congressmen, please heed the call. Don't stand in the doorway, don't block off the hall. I mean, you can either get with it and you can engage with new generations, or you can get left behind. I mean, that's basically the choice for older generations of politicians. And we did it to the people who came before us, and there are other people coming up. And so that's exciting. But if we put it all together into a strong, multi-generational, multi-ethnic, multiracial, multi-religious, constitutional, progressive politics.
Sounds like
for the
America.
future, that's America. And if you can capture the spirit of America, then you're going to win the future.
Well, I appreciate you taking some time for this young person. I know you and Brian Tyler Cohen did class when your constitutional law class that you did. I think we might have to bring that back in some form, talking about Donald Trump's assault on our Constitution constantly.
Well, it's like the young people are taking ideas most seriously at this moment. It's very gratifying to see.
Well, I hope my generation can be engaging with you as much as possible. I always appreciate it.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
Thank you much, man.